And now, it's The Law Show on CL 650. A comprehensive look at everything you need to know about the law.
Bye-bye love, bye-bye happiness, hello loneliness, I think I'm gonna cry.
That's kind of a depressing song to kick off the show, but hey, let's jump right into it. We are talking about family law, getting divorced and separated, so it is the perfect song for this show. And welcome to The Law Show on CL 650. In studio today from McQuarrieHunterLLP in Surrey, we have David Halkett, partner at Macquarie, and Sarah Morse, associate, and welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Now,
Thanks for having us.
You're in the family law department there at Macquarie, and we have other areas of law come on to the show. Do you guys think you're the best at hosting the radio show?
Oh, jeez. Put me on the spot there. Of course we are.
Sarah?
Absolutely. We've been doing it longer than anyone else. We better be good.
I just wonder, when you're getting coffee in the morning, you talk about, your war stories of hosting the radio show. Does it come up?
It's come up once or twice.
Okay, good. I'd love to be a fly on the wall at McQuarrieHunterLLP to find out how that goes. So today we're talking about separation, scenarios for separating, why people get married, reasons for divorce, different categories of sort of stages in life when people are getting divorced. So is there a trend at all out there that you see in your practice of ages? Is it people who be married for 5 or 6 years and it's just they're not compatible?
Well, it varies. There's the people who fall into that category. And then there's also the ones who've been married for a long time. The children have finally left the home and they realize they have nothing in common anymore. And they move on.
Or did they ever?
That may be that have been the case too. And often they say people have come in and they say, I've never been happy. It's like, well, you were with the person 25 years. It wasn't all bad, But I think that the trend is that people are getting divorced. Either they had a starter marriage, so that lasted 5 years, and they realized that wasn't the right person. Then they had the one they had the children with, and then they find their soulmate after the second marriage, so to speak. And I think part of it is we live longer now than we ever did before. It used to be often your marriage ended with the death of one of the two parties, but now you are around for much longer. So
they say people getting into the employment field now are going to have multiple different careers. So you're saying you think it's going to be quite normal to have multiple partners over the decade?
I would agree with that. And that I would say that I'm seeing more and more clients that are in that category, that the children are older or are over the age of majority now. And people are realizing that they're not living to 75, they're living to 80, 90, beyond. And that's changing their perspective in terms of staying married to someone for another 30 years without the distraction of kids and that sort of thing.
Now, are those clients different if they're in the 55 plus versus the 35 with two little kids, say? Is it a different mentality?
Well, yeah, obviously there's no children issues you have to deal with anymore in terms of where the children reside and support issues for the children. But then the issues kick into spousal support if one of the spouses stayed home for the longest time, take care of those children who are no longer at home. And then there's retirement issues. We're splitting a pension, which we thought we were going to be able to rely on when we're older. And now, of course, that's no longer the case, and that you're only getting half. So that changes a lot of the
But then you're also getting half of the house that's gone up considerably.
Tremendously, yes. That's true. Yeah.
And does money make it clearer for people or muddy their decision? Some people might look at it and say, well, you know what? If we sell our house and we get divorced, I now have a nest of money that I can go and I might not have a house, I might have a nice apartment, but I can have my own life. Or is it the other way around that they think, oh, it's so expensive out there. If I'm on my own, I couldn't make it.
I personally think that is a factor for a fair number of people, especially considering where we live in the Lower Mainland and the expenses. People are having to look at different scenarios. First of all, are they going to separate and looking at, we don't have enough equity in our house. Where are we going to live? How are we going to get by if we separate?
So that's one of the differentiators between the newlyweds and the divorcing gray-haired set, the baby boomer set, right?
Exactly. They may have a big house to sell, but they're never going to have what they had. So that's a factor in that.
But they actually have equity versus what Sarah's saying is the young families They don't have any equity yet.
So some people will stick it out a lot longer because they literally feel as though they can't get out on their own, or they're coming up with unique scenarios where they're sharing the same house, living on separate floors, or perhaps even building a laneway home, or doing some kind of unique setup to accommodate not having to move away from the property because there's just not enough equity.
I was going to get into that. So separation. So give us what is a legal separation and how long can that go on for?
Well, there's no definition of legal separation in Canada. You're either separated with an agreement, so to speak, or you're just separated. There's no legal separation. It's not like we see on American TV shows where they're legally separated. There's no such thing. Basically, once you are living separate and apart with an intention not to get back together and you have the mental element, then you can be separated.
So what's the threshold for that?
Being separate, so you can be in the same home, but you're living separate lives in separate rooms. Or one has moved out of the home with the intention that the marriage is over. So
you have to actually say the words.
No, you just have to have it in your own head that you think the marriage is over.
But some people could say what could have been 10 years ago.
Potentially. I've had people who've been separate and apart in the same home for 5 years.
Really?
Now, the tough part kicks in when they've been still contributing to the asset and the assets have increased. It may be that they still get divided as of the time they actually physically move out of the home. But you can be living separate and apart in the same home for a number of years.
And so can that go in indefinitely? Or do you have to finalize it with divorce?
Well, you would want to because there's limitation issues and things like that. And there's just, I find that I do have some files where people have been separated for 10 years and they've moved on, but they still don't have the closure. So you need to deal with those issues if you want to have a emotional closure and financial closure.
Well, that's it. You can't, until you actually get an order or an agreement in place, you can't resolve the financial issues. And then often the legal marriage ends just simply, that's just the tidying up the loose end, so to speak.
That's just the rubber stamp, right?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying that separation doesn't always lead to divorce, but in your opinion, it should?
Well, usually it does. Usually by the time someone has gotten to the point that they're separating, they're usually not going to get back together. In most cases, I've had some parties where we've had a year and a half of litigation, and then they get back together again. So it does happen, but usually once someone has made a decision not to be with the other person, they will continue on with the process.
So are there guidelines for separation? Like you said, you have to be physically separated or just mentally separated?
Well, they have to combine. It's kind of like in a criminal matter where you have to do the act and it has to be you have to have the mental element to do it. So you have to be living separate and apart. So being apart, because one's away to work, say, up northern Alberta, that's not a separation unless during that time one of the two parties thinks our marriage is over. Then that's when the clock starts to tick.
So they don't have to physically say it to the other person, I want to be separated. They just have to, in their own mind, think that they're separated.
And all you need is one of the parties to come to that conclusion. And then that's when the marriage is technically a separated marriage.
Isn't that vague, though?
Well, and if you're in that situation, you should make it clear that that's what you want because, as David referred to earlier, it can cause extreme difficulties when it comes to trying to figure out when the separation occurred and then valuing the asset. So it certainly is easier if you express that intention verbally or otherwise.
So walk me through a scenario where assets change once you've made that. Like, why is that important?
Well, the date of separation is important because the family property and debt gets, in effect, crystallized as of that date. So what was owned by the parties as of the date of separation is what gets divided later on. There's exceptions, such as if one asset's transferred into another or if debts are increased to maintain the family during the time of separation. There can be arguments to add to it. But basically, you determine property and debt as of the date of separation.
But could somebody say, oh, well, in my mind, I was separated years ago and that asset that I now have, it shouldn't be included. Do people kind of play the game a bit?
I've had people play that, but of course, because the court values as of the date of trial or agreement or determination by the judge, usually that doesn't make that much of a difference. So if you had a house, you say I was separated 20 years ago in my mind, and you may have been separated in the home, but it's gone from, your Dunbar special from say 500,000 up to like $2.5 million, you're probably going to divide that extra $2 million anyway. So it will make that much of a difference. But it can be an issue if you've acquired other assets. And that's when the argument would be whether or not you used family property to purchase that other asset.
That's why you need lawyers that know the system.
Well, I think if you think at any time that you may be separated, you should get legal advice as to where to go from there.
Oh, I have a question for you. How many people find out that their spouse wants to be separated and wants to get a divorce and is shocked by this?
Probably
a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say at least 25 to 35% of my party. Sometimes the other party doesn't know that the person's come in.
Any clue? Like they're blindsided?
Usually they unless you're totally oblivious to what's going on in your home, you should have some idea the other party isn't happy.
It's often that they think that they're working on the marriage and they're going to see where it goes. That seems to be the more common scenario as opposed to being completely blindsided. But when they're served with papers or contacted by a lawyer, they're completely surprised by it.
I hear this scenario, we'll have another kid and that'll bring us closer together. I'm sure your advice is probably not a good time to be adding something more complexity, right?
That usually doesn't help the situation.
No.
Yeah, because we've heard that scenario before.
Absolutely.
All right. When we come back, we're going to get into what happens when someone comes to see you at McQuarrie? Like, what are the steps? What do you need to sort of get the initial consultation going and the separation moving forward towards divorce, and how you hold your client's hand, because that's a big part of this, right?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
When we continue next with David Halkett and Sarah Morse from McQuarrie, next on The Law Show on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.